What's up, Vegas? I am so excited for this conversation. But before we get started, I need to make a disclaimer regarding this conversation. For all of you guys that have been along this journey, back in May, I had a conversation with Michael Naft. And for those who do know me, Michael and I actually have a few connections to each other. So I just want to kind of get this out of the way. In case any sort of unconscious biases or anything pop up through this conversation. Michael and I were both a part of the same fraternity in college, AEPA. It's a Jewish fraternity. Although we didn't attend UNLV at the same time, we do have a lot of mutual friends. And so I've had a lot of respect for him throughout this time. And, having a lot of friends and a lot of how tight the Jewish community is, you tend to favor somebody in that situation. But this platform that I'm building and the thing that's so powerful about long form conversational podcasts is that you get undivided attention, which is something that you don't see throughout social media nowadays. You get to sit here and talk with somebody for, up to an hour, and you just truly get to understand somebody. And I'm a very curious person. So I've been honored to have Michael Naft's actual opponent on the show. His name is Mike Thomas. He's running for Clark County Commissioner of District A. And so without further ado, I want to welcome Mike Thomas.
Thank you. Appreciate you having me. And although I didn't grow up in Las Vegas, I know about the Jewish community. I myself am Jewish. So
are you?
I'll throw that out there. Yeah.
Wow.
It's funny because growing up with the last name Thomas, people don't know that. But my family are all Russian Jews. I think it's Tomasovich.
Oh, wow.
So,
same here. Actually, Gallen is my father's last name, but my mother's Jewish. So if I would have taken her last name, it would have been Rothenberg.
Ah, there you go.
So I would have been, Jacob Noah Rothenberg. I'd be like, oh my God, that just screams Jew. I just need the Jew curls at that point.
That's right.
No, but I just want to say thank you for coming on, man. I know with how close the elections are and everything like that, people become very divided over what their beliefs are. But there was something that we should start off right in the beginning was your unity message that you had put on October 1st, basically talking that you notice that there's a lot of political extremism happening, not just in Vegas, but across the country.
Oh, absolutely.
And that we need to just understand each other better at the time and not just verbally attack everybody, even though that's you kind of have to have a happy medium in politics to point out the disadvantages. I haven't seen any other politician actually make that kind of sort of message regarding that. So I think that was very cool and honorable of you to bring that message for the community.
Thank you. And there were some words. It was a speech I was going to give at a remembrance celebration on October 1st at the Police Memorial Park, but that was canceled because of the crowd size restrictions. And as you said, I think we see more so on social media these personal attacks because people want to get the likes. They want to get the endorphins to kick in to say, oh, I did this, and everybody's an armchair warrior. And I decided to step back. There are people that I surround myself with that might go on attacks on occasion, but I decided to step back and say, no, let's talk about the real issues. Let's talk about what's going on. And there's far too much going on for me to just attack an opponent.
Feels like now there's so much that's been happening with, you have coronavirus, you have the protests, you have just all kinds of economic disasters and relief, and businesses are shutting down. It's like you really can't get your message through just because it seems like every few days there's just something else that pops up.
Yeah, it is true. It's a very, I'll use the word unique and be kind. It's a unique year, unique campaign. And as much as it puts me at a disadvantage, I think it puts my opponent at a disadvantage also. So all he can do is spend his $1 million and put up signs all over the place. But both of us can't make the personal appearances that we want for the places that we want. I ran against Steve Sisolak at the end of 2015 for 2016, and I went all over the place. I went to Democrat luncheons and met with people. I met with independents. I met with libertarians. I met with Republicans, and that's something that we're lacking, that we can't do at this time just because of our restrictions and limitations.
Yeah, and when you take away that social connection, you're just limited to words on a screen, and
Exactly.
that gets taken out of context because you can't see the emotion or the social cues that are behind it. And I think body language is one of the most important aspects when it comes to just basic communication, because you can tell when people are being serious or not, or if they're kind of playing some sort of satirical wording.
Yeah, I agree. I agree wholeheartedly.
So let's actually start from the beginning of who Mike Thomas is. Let's bring it back, because I know throughout this conversation we'll probably touch on a plethora of political points, but I just want to know who you are as a person. So we'll go all the way back to, let's just say young Mike Thomas. Let's say middle school.
Middle school. Okay.
Yeah. What was middle school Mike Thomas like, and where were you born and raised at that point?
I grew up in Los Angeles County. I grew up in Van Nuys, Sherman Oaks area. I went to Ulysses S. Grant High School. Prior to that, I went to Robert Millikan Middle School. And you ask what Mike Thomas was like in middle school. Mike Thomas in middle school was pretty much the same as Mike Thomas in high school. I was a geeky kid. I was a comic book fanatic. I started swimming competitively from a young age, and girls weren't even on my mind, believe it or not. My life consisted of going to swim practice in the morning, going to swim practice at school, going to swim practice in the afternoon until the evening hours, and then going to bed, and in between reading comics and drawing and trying to get a job in the comic book field.
That sounds like fun.
Yeah.
Were you a sprint type of swimmer, or did you go the distance?
I was long distance, and the reason I did both when I competed, but I really liked the long distance because what I would do is I would do the 500-yard freestyle or the mile freestyle, and I would, do just laps back and forth, and I wasn't even keeping track of how many laps I was doing. I was basically singing Beatles songs in my head to keep me going, and that's where my second love came in from, other than swimming, was in between swim meets or at swim meets. My dad went out one day and gave me a whole collection of comic books, and I would just sit there and read them. I didn't care if they got wet. I didn't care if they got trashed and throw them away. But what I really enjoyed was the artwork, and I worked real hard to try to get into the industry, and had some opportunities that, albeit, were missed. And that led me into a whole new direction.
And the new direction was you went into the police force, correct?
Yeah, what happened was Marvel Studios. I actually met a gentleman named Stan Lee. He drove up he drove up in a white Mercedes, and his license plate said Stan Lee. And I was introduced to him by a gentleman from Hanna-Barbera Studios, because I went there to try to get a job painting cells for Scooby-Doo and doing animation. And I was given an introduction to Stan Lee. I met Stan Lee in Van Nuys, California. And he said, "Oh, hey, we're opening an art studio, a Marvel Productions studio at Van Nuys and Ventura in California. And we want young artists to come in, and we'll put you guys to work. You'll work hard, but it's a job. It'll get your foot in the door." And I was all set to do that. And this was 1982, 83, I believe. And there was a Chinese restaurant next to Marvel Production Studios called Ho Toys that I would go to every once in a while. And they had a fire, and the studio caught fire and burned down, and they scrapped the idea. And I was contacted by the people at Marvel Productions, and they said, "We like you. We like the art that you do. Come to New York, and we'll give you a job working for Marvel Comics." And I did one of these, weigh it out, and I said, "Well, I don't know anybody in New York. I don't have family in New York. I think I'm gonna pass." And then I went and spoke to a buddy of mine named Paul, who was trying out for the LA County Sheriff's Department. And I met with a recruiter at in Whittier, California, and he said, "Why don't you become a composite sketch artist?" And I said, "Well, what does that entail?" And he says, "Well, you interview witnesses and victims of crimes, and they describe you what the person looked like, their eyes, their nose, their hair. Could you do something like that?" And I made a couple sketches for him on the spot. And he said, "Oh, you'd be perfect for that." So he said, "But you have to be a sworn deputy to get into that side of it." I said, "Okay, I'll do that." So I went through all the hoops and ended up getting hired by the sheriff's department in 1986, and went through their academy, 26 weeks, and I was midway through the academy, and my drill instructor came up to me and he said, "I got good news and bad news." And I said, "Okay, what's the good news?" And he goes, "The good news is you're doing great. There's no problem. You're gonna pass the academy." So I said, "Okay." I go, "Well, and what's the bad news?" And he goes, "Well, the bad news is we don't have composite sketch artists." I was like, "Oh, you're killing me."
Recruited you in.
"You're killing me." He said, "Yeah, we use computers and we use a thing called an identikit, which is like an acetate, and the victim picks the eyes and they lay it on a light board, and then they said pick a nose and they lay that on top and pick a mouth and they do that, and that's the new composite sketch artist." So I was like, "Okay, well, I'm here. I'm going to stick it out. I'm getting in pretty good shape, and I'm enjoying it." So I stuck with it and graduated from the Sheriff's Academy.
Isn't that funny how that always happens? Is where they'll, no matter if it's business related, interest related, or something like that, and this translates into politics as well. As they say they're going to do something,
right?
And then once you get there, they're like, "It never existed."
And my friend Paul, and my friend Paul, who was all gung ho about joining the sheriff's department, he actually didn't get hired. But he's doing okay. He became a reporter for the Hollywood Reporter, a journalist. So he's doing okay.
I bet you don't see that often a kid who's just so fascinated with cartoons and something that's so fictitious and isn't real, and then you're just basically thrown into reality, just smacking you in the face once you're in the police department. You're not seeing Batman, you're seeing who Batman's actually chasing.
Well, but actually, it kind of in my mind, every day I went to work and I put on the sheriff's uniform and pinned on my badge. I was putting on a costume. And it was kind of funny. I'm like, okay, this is my alter ego. This is my other persona. I'm going to put on my costume, my uniform, and I'm going to go to work. And I really enjoyed it. I had a good time. I can't say I had a bad day when I was working for the sheriff's department in Los Angeles.
When you put that uniform on, you said it's like an alter ego. What kind of alter ego is that?
Well, not an alter ego of per se of my being a different person. I'll give you a perfect example. I had a training officer, a real hard-nosed, rock-solid training officer, and one day we were walking to our patrol car, and there was a $5 bill laying in the street next to the car. There was nobody around it, and to this day I don't know if he put it down there as a test or if it legitimately was a $5 bill sitting by the police car. And, he motioned, and I picked it up, and he said, "You going to keep it?" And I said, "Robert," I go, "when I put this uniform on, I stand up a little straighter. When I have this badge on my chest, I have a higher set of morals." He says, "Okay, so you're going to keep it?" I said, "Well, when the uniform comes off, I've got $5 extra I just found, So yeah, he laughed at that too.
Yeah, you have a sense of duty, not even just for your local police department, but it's for the United States. You guys are like a band of brothers and sisters as well.
Well, that I'll tell you. I'll be honest with you. It meant a lot to me when I raised my right hand and I swore an oath. Every day I tried to live my life as a police officer, and one thing. Then I became a training officer and other positions. And one thing that I always told younger officers. I said, "Don't do anything on the job that you'd be ashamed of your mother to see you do." And that resonates, because if you're afraid of your mother or even your father seeing you do something, you probably shouldn't be doing it. That's that little voice saying, "No, you're don't want to do that." And that's how I live my life as a police officer.
Yeah, it's good. We all need to be a part of something that's larger than ourselves. Whether like we were talking before this conversation, I was in Greek life. That was kind of like my
Right.
first thing, or on a sports team. It teaches you the different intangibles in life, commitment, teamwork, your ethics, values, morality, humility, everything of that nature. And sometimes not all of us get to experience that.
That's true, and as I said, I was a competitive swimmer, so SPAAU, I was a part of a team, and when you do relays, you're a part of a team. So that was something that I carried into my law enforcement career.
And you ended up working your way up in the law enforcement career for about 25 years, correct? That I read on your profile.
Yeah, a little longer than that. I went from the LA County Sheriff's. Well, while I was with the LA County Sheriff's Department, one of the things that I did really well, and a lot of people told me I did well, was writing reports. And I think that might have been the comic book background coming back, because you got to tell a story and it's got to be easily understood. So I became certified as a report writer. I got to teach other officers and other deputies how to write reports. And while I was with the Sheriff's Department in Los Angeles, I received numerous awards and accommodations. And I ended up heading up the Crime Prevention Bureau after being a training officer for a certain amount of time. And I was the spokesperson. I was thrust into the limelight of West Hollywood, which is a very liberal city.
Very liberal.
And this is back in the early 90s. So, I mean, I was meeting with the mayor and city council on a regular basis. I was the go-to guy. If there was a news reporter that wanted to do a ride-along with the sheriff's department, it was go ride with Mike Thomas. And it got, you always put on a smile and you put your best foot forward, but it literally got monotonous sometimes, because sometimes you just want to be by yourself sitting in your car and you don't want to entertain people, and everybody thinks cops is rah, 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 8 hours, 10 hours of nonstop, excitement, but it's really monotonous, and maybe you've got 30 minutes of excitement. And I used to joke, I'd say, well, I'm going to have brochures written up that say, when in Southern California, don't forget to go to Magic Mountain, Disneyland, Universal Studios, and you ride along with Mike Thomas, the deputy sheriff from West Hollywood, So, but, yeah.
It seems like people, at least in your area, they noticed that you had some sort of leadership intangibles, because they're obviously pointing them to go ride with you, and you're becoming like the mentor, even at a younger age.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it's because I wasn't judgmental. I judged people on their actions, not on their ideology or their beliefs. And as I said, and then you talk about culture shock. All of a sudden, we had the Rodney King riots. The verdict came down in, I think, end of 91, 92, and the Rodney King riots broke out. And I worked 6 weeks of 16-hour days. I never got to go home, and I was basically sleeping at the station. And after the Rodney King riots, which to me was like driving into Lebanon every day, I remember driving to work right after the jury came back with the verdict from Simi Valley on the Rodney King officers, and they were acquitted, seeing plumes of smoke and long line of cars. It was like a science fiction movie, people fleeing the city. And I'm the schmuck driving into the city. I go, what am I getting myself into? And that was probably the last time I saw my wife for about 6 weeks. And then right after the Rodney King riots, we said, okay, well, my parents had previously moved to Las Vegas, and they were in failing health. And my wife and I were looking for a home and, start a family. And we frankly couldn't afford to live either in the San Fernando Valley or in parts of Los Angeles. And we looked at some homes out here, and I said, let's move to Las Vegas. And we did.
Choice.
Yeah, and we did. And I took a lateral. They gave me credit for 7 years, and I went to work for the City of North Las Vegas Police Department. Became obviously a police officer, a training officer. I headed up their accreditation bureau. And again, I was teaching report writing to officers. That was a given because I was certified by the state of Nevada to report write. And I totally revamped the use of force for North Las Vegas. Prior to that, they most police departments at that time had like a staircase.
Okay.
If an offender does this, you do this. Then you move up to the next level and the next level and the next level. And we found that a lot of officers were getting hemmed up in court and getting sued because a smart defense attorney would say, wait a minute, you pepper sprayed him, but you didn't use verbal commands. Or you used your baton, but you didn't use your pepper spray. Or, God forbid, you went to deadly force and you didn't use everything before that. And what I did is I revamped it and I said, well, instead of a staircase, let's use a wagon wheel, with the officer being the spoke in the middle. And that way the officer can go right, left, up, down as needed based on what the suspect does. Mm-hmm. So you're not locked in. And that worked out real well. And then another great idea came up and I said, you guys have all kinds of definitions of force. How about unreasonable force? Well, we've never encountered that. And I said, well, if a suspect steals a candy bar from a 7-Eleven, are you allowed to beat him into submission? That would be unreasonable force. And while we're talking about unreasonable force, let's talk about unnecessary force. Force might have been justified, but it was unreasonable and it wasn't necessary. So I revised all that, and then things would have it. I ran afoul of the union, and there was a lot of pressure, and they eliminated my position, and I found myself out of law enforcement. So that was in 2000. So I joined with a friend of mine who was an LAPD officer, which was kind of interesting because I was LA County Sheriff's and we didn't get along, the two agencies. And I opened up with him a company out here that was a security investigative company. And it was very lucrative. We did well in the beginning. I supervised and managed about 40 people. But my partner was not a great businessman, and every time we turned a profit, he would go out and buy himself a new Mercedes or a new car. And I found myself holding paychecks in order to make sure that the employees were being paid. And finally, my wife said, no, this isn't going to work. If you want to do charity work, there's an awful lot of charities in town you can go to. So I decided to go back into law enforcement, and I was fortunate enough to get hired by the Clark County School District Police Department. Again, hired as an officer in 2003. I was hired as an officer. I became a training officer. And then one day, an officer came up and said, something was going on, and I wrote a grievance. Went through the collective bargaining agreement, and I said, well, this is how we're supposed to do it. And I hand carried it down to the school district headquarters on West Sahara. And they said, what's this? And I said, well, it's a grievance. And they said, what do we do with it? I said, well, it's all in the contract. You know, the contract that you guys sign and we sign. And they're like, okay. So I explained to them what the process was, I showed them, and they were like, okay. And that worked out. And from that point on, the union membership said, wow, you're really good at writing grievances and representing officers. We're going to make you the secretary of the union. And I said, well, don't we need a vote or something? And they're like, nah, you can be the secretary.
You're appointed.
The position's open. It's yours. And then after that, I ran for and I won the position of vice president of the union. And then ultimately I ran and won the position of president. So I sat with the hierarchy of the Clark County School District and negotiated contracts and went through several bargaining sessions and again also represented officers. And it was kind of interesting because I sat across the table from attorneys, people that had gone to law school, and I hadn't gone to law school, and I argued cases against them before an arbitrator and won. So did that until I retired August of 2017. Prior to my retiring, I got injured on the job. There were 200 students that were brawling in the street outside of Cimarron Memorial High School.
Dude, high school fights out here are insane.
Tell me about it.
They're insane. They started pepper spraying everyone my senior year. Like, no matter what happened.
Exactly. And this was blacks against Hispanics. It was 200 of them literally in the street. And a young man got knocked unconscious, got his head split open, was laying in the rocks, and he was getting stomped on and kicked. And I was the only officer there. I was just monitoring the crowd because it was off the campus. And I ran into the crowd. I picked him up, put him on my shoulder, and carried him to my patrol car. And it was actually his cousins thought I was arresting him. And they jumped on me while I was holding him, and my left foot flipped over, and I got what's called a Liz Frank injury. I guess it's pretty common with football players. And I broke every bone in my foot, every single bone, all the metatarsals. Long story short, I ended up having a 5.5 hour surgery. I have cadaver bone in my foot now. I don't have any toes on my left foot, including the big toe is gone. And I ended up with 3 brackets and 8 screws, including a 8-inch screw where my heel bone was. And so my law enforcement career was basically done. I stuck it out as best I could until I retired in August of 2017.
Wow, that is a crazy story.
I lived it, so I know it was crazy.
Thank you. Well, thank you for your service, man. That's I know, like I said, going to Chaparral, there was some insane fights there. So I know exactly how that goes. But there was a few points throughout that entire segment that I wanted to highlight.
Please.
One thing that stuck out to me in the very beginning is that you said that you judge people based off of their actions and not so much their ideologies.
Yes.
And that's something that often I think gets confused. And it's interesting the position that you're in, because with politics, a lot of it's based off ideologies and then implementation instead of actions.
Well, it shouldn't be. It should be based on facts. One of the things that I did, even as a police officer, is I would arrest people and I'd take them to jail. Obviously, that's part of the job. And by the time I got to the jail, or even out here, the Clark County Detention Center, they'd say, "Hey, Officer Thomas, thank you for what you did." And I said, "Well, don't thank me. I'm taking you to jail." And they're like, "Yeah, but you weren't an asshole about it." And I said, "Well, you know what? This way you can be with your family, you can be with your kids. You don't have to look over your shoulder worrying about getting picked up, handcuffed in front of them. You spend the night in jail, you go before the judge, and then you get a clean slate and a fresh start." And I think you mentioned politics. I think it's the same way. You can judge people based on facts, based on the information you have. I don't think ideology comes into play as much as concrete facts. I mean, a rational person makes a decision based on the information that they have, and I think that's a big part of it being a politician.
So that's more what you believe is the facts that you have, and then implementing it there, and then kind of transgressing based off of what that outcome is in the beginning.
Right, and you have to weigh it out and say what's good. Does this benefit a few? Does this benefit the everybody? Mm-hmm. I mean, what are we looking at here? And then of course there's a cost factor. Is the cost factor worth implementation of this, or you just say, let's do it anyway and be damned? I mean, you can't do that. You can't run your life like that. You can't make decisions like that.
I think this line of thinking is more effective in terms that it gives you the ability to pivot based off of, because if you're going off the actions and something isn't working, then you're like, okay, we can make a pivot. Whereas if you're based off of an ideology, you're just going to keep trying to ram it down people's throats or whatever the case is until something happens.
Right. There's an expression in Las Vegas: don't throw good money after bad. If you've got something that's going on that's not working, well, then obviously it's not working and needs to be changed. Mm-hmm. And I think it's the same thing. And now you're dealing with the people's money. You're making decisions that will affect people. I think you do have to say, well, wait a minute. If it hasn't worked before, what makes you think it's going to work now? And and again, who's going to benefit by the decisions that we make? So I think that's something that has to be taken into account.
Interesting. So I know you ran against Steve Sisolak in 2016, mm-hmm. and leading up until the pandemic, what were your policies and beliefs up until the pandemic, and how has that changed with, I guess, all of the crazy things that are happening in 2020?
Well, my policies really haven't changed. If anything, I've added to them. I've always been a strong supporter of the police. Obviously, I would fight any effort to defund the police. Always been a strong believer in the Second Amendment, because sometimes the police aren't there to protect you and your family. So who's left? You have to protect yourself. You can't be a victim. And one of the things that I've talked about is bringing fiscal responsibility back to the Clark County Commission. I said that in 2015, 2016 when I ran against Steve Sisolak, and I say that now. There's things that I don't believe that the commission's doing that is necessarily fiscally sound.
What would that be specifically?
Specifically, I can give you a prime example. Everybody that lives in Clark County that owns property, a home,
okay,
they get charged 4.8% annually in property tax. State law says that property tax can only be raised 3%. So they assume in Clark County, and the commissioners allow it to happen, that everybody in Clark County owns a rental property, and they send you a little postcard, usually August or September of every year, saying, prove to us that this is your primary residence. And if you don't send that in, you get charged 4.8% on your property tax, rather than the 3% that the law says they can only raise your property tax. So that's one thing. Another thing that I've always wondered about was, well, I don't have to tell you, in August 1st of 2017, we had a mass shooting here in Las Vegas. We only have one level 1 trauma center in Clark County, and that's UMC. Yeah. Any other hospital, any other medical center that is applied to the Clark County Commission to be certified as a trauma level hospital has been rebuffed. They've been rejected. UMC is a public hospital. It loses millions of dollars every year to keep it afloat, because it's a public hospital, and they're servicing people that will never ultimately pay their bills. I mean, aside from the ones that do pay their bills, but so there's money that will never be recouped. And I think that there's a good source of revenue would be open up some other trauma centers. We had probably 800 victims of the shooting. Yeah. I mean, we had ultimately it ended up being 60 fatalities, but 58 that night were critical care. And the only hospital that's equipped to deal with shootings of that caliber was University Medical Center. Victims went to various other hospitals, but unless you're a level 1 trauma center, you go there, you get stable, and then they transfer you to a place like UMC.
Yeah,
for
and
ultimately your care.
And with a traumatic event like that, they probably were not prepared for it, and it becomes just overcrowded for that. So I could see definitely the need for it, and I didn't even know that.
Yeah. I mean, you've got one trauma center servicing 2.5 million people in Clark County. It needs to change.
How would you go about creating another one? Would it be through private funding or through the taxpayers?
These private hospitals, all they have to do is apply.
It's literally just an application process.
They apply, then they have to prove that they have specialists, that they have levels of doctors that actually work for them or that contract with them that would be able to work in a facility other than UMC.
Huh, I did not know that.
Yeah, all they have to do is apply. And as I said, these applications have been sent in to the Clark County Commission, and they've been rebuffed. And I think a big part of that was under the leadership of the chairman at the time, Steve Sisolak, because he had major union support at the time, and the union said, no, we don't want private organizations coming in and setting up trauma centers. And that's where we are.
And you have experience with as being a union leader. Do you think the same situation would arise this time around if there was more applications that were sent out?
I would hope that not being on the commission, I don't know. I don't know. I can't answer that. I think that I would hope that they would say, look, let's look at the needs of the people and say, UMC's overwhelmed at this point in time, and we there is a need in the outlying areas. There's needs for other trauma centers to open up. So I would hope that they would, I won't say reverse themselves, but I would hope that they would look long and hard and say, what's the benefit of opening further, more trauma centers, even level 2 or level 3 trauma centers.
And if you were elected in, I know this is something that you've repeated, is that the Clark County Commission has been predominantly or all Democrats since the early 2000s.
Yeah, the last Republican on the Clark County Commission, I believe, was elected 2004. It was Mr. Woodbury. And in 2007, 4 of the 7 Clark County commissioners ended up going to federal prison.
On what kind of charges?
They were all indicted for money laundering, wire transfer fraud. That was Aaron Kenny, Lance Malone, Mary Kincaid, and Dario Herrera. So 4 of the 7, all Democrats, ended up going to federal prison. And yet here we are today, more than a decade later, and we're still all vote just Democrats.
So if you were able to defeat Michael Naft and you made your way as the first conservative on the commission board in about 15 years or so, would that make any difference, even though you'd be outnumbered 6-1?
I think it would make a difference in my district, because there's things that are going on now that, and it might lead to another question, but there are things that are going on now that I totally disagree with. We have people that are out of work. We have people that don't know how they can feed their families, pay their rent, pay their mortgage, and people are hurting. Businesses are closing. Some businesses are closing for good, and if a business closes, that means employees are getting laid off. And the last thing they need is a Clark County commissioner sending business license agents out to fine and close businesses because a person's not wearing a mask or not wearing a mask correctly. We're not the mask police. If there's a complaint, fine, send somebody out to investigate it. But to have business license agents show up at an Albertsons or a business and just kind of walk around and look and go, oh, that customer's got a mask below his nose. Mm-hmm. That's a $15,000 fine. I mean, these businesses are struggling. They're hurting. The people are hurting. Now you're going to levy fines on top of that? Are you going to force them to close their doors? I think that I could make a difference in my own district and stop that practice.
So your District A is the largest district, correct? Yeah,
yes.
It's the southern half of Las Vegas. And,
yes.
And when I had Michael Naft on, he said it's composed of about 45,000 businesses. So it's a large area to govern and to help regulate.
Yes.
What sort of differences could you make on the contrary to what Michael Naft has instilled in his 2 years?
Well, like I said, I think I could stop the practice of closing businesses. I mean, I don't want to put a cashier in the position of becoming the mask police. If a customer refuses to wear a mask, great, then don't serve them. Don't ask them to leave. But if they don't want to leave, I don't expect you to get into a physical altercation or put yourself at risk. I mean, if you're making just above minimum wage, to say, hey, you need to have a mask on, you need to go. That's not realistic. And again, one of the things that is, that my opponent is doing is sending people out to find these businesses and close these businesses. And we need to open up. People are hurting. Lives are being destroyed. We need to open up Southern Nevada. We need to open up Clark County. I think we can open up and do it responsibly and do it safely. Constant cleaning. If you want people as a business to wear a mask, then the business dictates they wear a mask. Again, limited occupancy, social distancing, it can be done. But I think what has previously happened, and it might have come directly from the governor, is politicians are now in the business of picking winners and losers. And
Unfortunate.
And I don't think we should be in the business of picking winners and losers. If we can open up a big box store, then the little mom and pop store can open as well. And I think that's, as you said, that's unfortunate, and I think it needs to change.
Yeah, I think this pandemic Vegas has always talked about the Strip kind of running Vegas, but I think that this pandemic's kind of shown people that's really what's happening.
Yeah.
Here.
I mean, it's crazy. People can't get their unemployment. People can't get their PUA. And again, people don't know what to do. I don't even know what's going to happen when the moratorium is up and people, have to either leave or get evicted. I mean, we're going to have the courts filled. These people aren't going to all of a sudden come up with all the arrears for their rent. So I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen. But I think the best course of action is go ahead and open up. If people have an underlying medical condition or they have a compromised immune system, your personal choice. Stay out. Don't go out and about. Just because I think we talked about it before we went on the air. You have a choice. You can live as a shut-in, or you could live your life. And I think too many lives are being destroyed.
There are. Is there concern that this kind of thinking is kind of like a business over public safety? That kind of seems to be what the argument is on like a national level now, where it's like the conservatives have kind of been placed into like, oh, it's money over public health. And then the left is kind of like, this pandemic is kind of just going to kill everyone, and we're trying to preserve every single life. Is there like a happy medium in between that and that kind of thinking?
Well, I think the happy medium is, as I said, you need to make personal decisions for what's best for you and your family.
So it comes down to the individual, right?
It comes down to the individual. I mean, if people are saying, well, I'm going to wait until there's a vaccine, that's not the panacea. We have the flu. The flu kills 85, 90,000 people every year, and there are vaccines for the flu. So again, what do you do? I mean, you've got to pay your rent. You've got to, you've got a career. You got to go to school. I mean, I feel so bad. My youngest daughter, she has compromised immunity, and she's been living as a shut-in. I think we're going to have a whole generation of kids that are lost because they miss that social interaction. And I mean, you look at suicide. Suicide rates are up 300%.
I've been echoing that 2020 is the year of mental health awareness.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, suicides are up. And now the Clark County School District is complaining because they went out and gave everybody these Chromebooks so they could do distance learning. And what are the kids doing? The kids are looking up how to commit suicide and suicide prevention. It tells you where their mind's at, what the mindset is. And I think we're shortchanging a whole generation.
So let's just play a thought experiment. Let's say that COVID pandemic's over, there's a vaccine, and let's say after the election, going into 2021, it's gone. What sort of changes, or what would you do as Clark County Commissioner if the coronavirus pandemic was gone?
Well, then hopefully we could get back to some semblance of normalcy. And one of the first things I would want to do, even if it doesn't go away totally, is we got to get people back to work. We've got to get businesses reopened. And I think part of that is eliminating the red tape that right now persons who want to open business have to jump through numerous hoops. They have to get numerous licensing and get things done. We don't have to reinvent the wheel here. This is just common sense. How many restaurants are there in Las Vegas and in Clark County? Somebody wants to open up a restaurant, the format is there. It's needs to be done. It's not rocket science. Let's cut through the red tape, let them open, get to work. I would propose a moratorium on business licenses, on give people tax breaks who hire a certain amount of employees, and guarantee a certain amount of employees work, so we can get people back to work and off of the public coffers. Mm-hmm. And that's really what my focus would be: getting people back to work, getting Clark County back to where it needs to be. As I said to you off the radio, it's tough living in the entertainment capital of the world if there's no entertainment. And that's why people come here. People don't come here to sit with a mask by the pool, Yeah, I
was literally just having this conversation on a podcast that I was on from a different Vegas podcast, is that Vegas always goes through these repurposing phases every 10 to 15 years. Right after the economic crisis, it was kind of the nightclub and day life scene that brought Vegas back into becoming the entertainment capital.
Right.
It seemed like Vegas was starting to bridge off of the Strip, and a lot of these small businesses and different industries of all sorts were starting to come to Vegas. And that's something that would be in your region. Yeah. So I think we need to come together and find what Vegas is going to be next. And the coronavirus kind of put a halt on that. And so it seems like Vegas is going through this nasty, like between a rock and a hard place situation where it's like on the Strip, you see a lot of this like violence because no one really knows what to do or like what Vegas is going to evolve into next.
Well, actually, I back in 2015, I predicted the violence. I said, look, we've got this stadium that's proposed to be built, that the taxpayers will be on the hook for a $750 million portion of it. Clark County Commission blessed it with Steve Sisolak spearheading that, and nobody voted for it. Nobody asked for it. It was done, without a referendum of the people. And I said, nothing against the Raiders, but I grew up in Los Angeles. I know what kind of fans that they usually attract. And I remember in 2007, I was living here when they had the NBA All-Star game. And I saw all the fights that broke out in the casinos and the strips, hotels. And that was just the NBA, NBA
NBA said they would never come back because of that.
Exactly. And we're seeing a repeat of that. And I think part of the problem is that the hotels are trying to work with what they have and lure people in with lower hotel rates, and we're getting an influx of a big criminal element from California and neighboring states to come here because there are no rules in Las Vegas if you talk to somebody, and they think they can do whatever they want to do. And again, that brings a criminal element with them.
I could tell you working on the Strip for the last 10 years and the last 5 at one of the most popular nightclubs, that's every single guest and customer's mindset. Not every single, but for the most part, especially once a few drinks come in.
Oh yeah.
The ego is a little elevated and they're like, oh, this is adult Disneyland. And so I get to reign supreme and do whatever I want.
Yeah. And that's not the case. This is still a community. You're coming into our community. If I go into somebody else's house, I act respectful. That's just the way I am.
So do you think in order to kind of prevent more violence from happening, do you think we need more police force? Do you think that the rates need to go up? Do you think the simple idea that you've kind of portraying is just open businesses back up and the quote unquote like bad customers are going to disappear because of this?
Well, I think we're kind of in a unique situation. We have protests. There are protests that are on the Strip. There are protests downtown, and a lot of that might be politically motivated. It'll either increase or it'll stop after November 3rd. And so I think that might make some of it go away just through natural secession. But also, that's why one of the reasons I'm against defunding the police. I mean, I hear these calls to, Mr. Naff is talking about, let's take money away from Metro and use it for social reform. I'm not even sure what that means, social reform. I know that if a person's breaking into your house, if a person's stealing your wallet, stealing your car, pulling a gun on you, attacking you or your family, you need the problem taken care of then and there. You don't pick up the phone and call a social worker. That's just not the way it is. Once the situation's handled, get the perpetrator, get the suspect the help that he or she needs, and get them mental health, whatever they need. That's where the social worker comes into play. But while the act is happening, while the violence is happening, the violence needs to be dealt with. And I think defunding the police is not the answer. And I would suggest, if he hasn't already, I would encourage the current Clark County Commissioner, do a ride-along with Metropolitan Police Department or with North Las Vegas or even the school police, and see what they deal with, and then ask yourself, how would this be handled if it wasn't a uniform officer that was there? That's the nature of the job. When I was a training officer, I always told people, and when I had ride-alongs, I said, what a police officer is? A police officer is a spoiler. And they go, well, what do you mean? I said, they're going to spoil your day. You're either getting arrested, you're getting a ticket, or they're bringing you bad news, or they're contacting you because you've been a victim of a crime, or something terrible has happened in your life, and now the police officer is going to come out and make your day worse. Mm-hmm. So there's no upside to being a police officer, but I understand that's the profession that I chose.
It's a tough job. Yeah, it is a tough job. Well, you did say earlier that you look at people's actions rather than their ideologies.
Yeah.
But it does seem that within the police department, and it hasn't really happened in Vegas, but across the country, of police officers, shooting unarmed black men for the most part. There is white male as well. It seems like this is a repetitive concept, or it's a repetitive action. Do you think that reappropriating certain funds would assist in this issue towards some sort of social programs? Like, how do you fix this sort of issue? Because it seems like people are just really hell bent on punishing the police because of this repetitive, unwarranted behavior.
Well, first off, I don't know necessarily that it's unwarranted behavior. It's just the behavior that makes the headlines. I think in every instance, the officer didn't create the situation. The officer didn't target a black man or a Hispanic man or an Asian man or a white male walking down the street and say, okay, I'm gonna interrupt that person's life and now I'm going to shoot him. It always was something that led to that. It was either a neighbor calling, a family member calling, and then the officer goes there. And again, police are reactionary. So the officer reacts to the situation. Back in the day when I first became a deputy sheriff or a police officer, you would say, hey, come here, I need to talk to you. Yes, officer, what do you need? Now it's flipped. The script has been flipped. Now it's why, as they continue to walk away. Why are you stopping me? And I think that people have been emboldened because everybody takes out their cell phone and they want to provoke a confrontation with the police, and they want to get on the news, or they want a headline, or they want to be a litigant and get paid, because far too many times it's easier to pay off the individual than it is to litigate it in the long run. And so I don't think that there's bad actors, there's bad apples in any large organization and in police departments. And you talk to officers, they'll be the first to tell you there's officers that they certainly don't like, that they don't get along with, that probably shouldn't be on the job. But that's not the individual officer's decision. That's the management, that's the administrator's decision. And ultimately it's the decision of the people that hire them. And if they can weed those out, then that's what needs to be done. The other thing is, I don't think you need to take money away from law enforcement. As you said, it's a tough job, and I think they earn every penny of it. But at the same time, something needs to be done. And I think there was a program back in the late 80s and early 90s of community-oriented policing, and I think we need to get back to that.
What is that?
That's where you have officers that are assigned to a particular area, division, and they get to know the neighborhood. They get to know the religious leaders in that area. And I think it's not so much having the police evolve to the needs of the people, but educating the people in the neighborhoods and the communities to the police and why they do what they do, and have them do ride-alongs with the police, so that if an incident does occur, they understand what happened. You got an educated public, you've got a police that's open and transparent and willing to show them this is what's going on. And I think that's the alternative to, rather than just let's take away money and call it social reform, and then we can get on the nightly news and say, well, I don't understand why there's still these things that are occurring, because we allocated X amount of dollars to it. And again, that's not an answer.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense. I've always been a little critical of just how governments tend to just kind of waste money. That's one of my big fears. Is they say, like, I've had multiple guests on here that work for nonprofit organizations, and they always advocate for the combination of private and public funding, because the private companies are very good at optimizing and preserving wealth and using it well, and then the public is good at putting up money,
right,
but it's just never spent efficiently.
Yeah. Well,
so that is my worry when they talk about reappropriating funds. Is like, where is it going to go? And I do believe there needs to be some sort of repercussions because of this.
Right.
But the way, if they do reappropriate funds, I need to know where it's going or what's happening to it.
Exactly. Just saying we're going to reapportion funding to social reform is not an answer. And if anybody says that, they should actually expound upon that. It's like the homeless issue. People are saying, well, these people don't have a place to live. That's a panacea. I mean, you want to build them housing? All you're doing is creating slums. I told you I'm from Los Angeles. I've gone back there on occasion, and I see the homeless tents. I see the homelessness, and it breaks my heart. That's where I grew up. That's the city that I love, and I don't like being there. It's horrendous, and giving somebody a home, although it puts a roof over their head, it doesn't take care of the problem. It doesn't take care of what led them to being homeless. Is it mental illness? Let's get them into some type of counseling. Get them into a program. Is it drug addiction? Get them into a program, okay? Help to make them a productive individual, then give them the affordable housing. I had a ride-along from the Los Angeles Times, a reporter, and we went to a park in West Hollywood, on the outskirts of West Hollywood, called Poinsettia Park. And on any given night, there were 1,500 homeless sleeping in the park. And I took this reporter, and we drove through the park, and then we walked, and she said, "This is horrible. I can't believe that the city allows this to happen." And I said, "No, these people want to be here." She goes, I cannot believe that. I said, "Come on, let's go talk to them." And we talked to a few of them, and I said, "Why are you here? Sleeping under the stars and in the middle of nowhere. You can go to Santa Monica and La Brea. There's a homeless shelter. They'll feed you. They'll give you a clean bed. And why don't you just go there?" And the answer was, "Why do I want to go there? They expect me to do chores. They won't let me drink. They expect me to bathe. They tell me I have to be inside at a certain time. No, I'm going to stay out here." And it was really eye-opening for the reporter, because she thought that the city was just allowing these people to be out in the middle of nowhere.
It's unfortunate. You start seeing it kind of popping up in Vegas a little bit more. I had a woman named Meredith Spriggs on here. She founded Carry Dodd, which is basically like a homeless outreach agency. Mm-hmm. And they patrol the streets kind of like how a casino promoter or nightclub promoter would, like on the Strip.
Right.
And their first task is to approach somebody who's homeless and try to understand them. She said it's like kind of like a psychologist at first to understand how they got in that situation. And she actually has the homeless people come and volunteer at their gardens before they actually get them into housing, and then they get them the ID and everything. And also housing does come predominantly towards the end.
Right. And I think that's a good way to approach it. I think that that's a way to do it, because they say that not necessarily the end justifies the means, but you give them a goal to work to, and let's take care of the underlying issues that led to their homelessness and work on that, and then we can build them up.
Yeah, and if we, it kind of all just circles back to, if this coronavirus pandemic just keeps playing out, then the situation's only going to be exacerbated greatly.
Oh, absolutely. Where are all these people going to go once the moratorium is over with? And along those lines, again, Steve Sisolak, our governor, he can mandate whatever he wants. But I think the Clark County commissioners are empowered to control Clark County. They can push back, and they can say, "Look, this isn't a law. The law is legislature driven. That's a law. This is a mandate." That's why the sheriff's not involved in enforcement of a mandate. And Clark County, they can say, "Okay, well, this business should be able to open, and these people should be able to go back to work." And I think that's something that they could push back on. And if the governor wants to take it to the courts, I can't imagine that he would win on a mandate.
I have seen a few different states actually file lawsuits against the governors for it being unconstitutional to keep people boxed into their homes.
Yeah, exactly.
So I guess that does become tough when the entire regulation department and the government oversight is all one party. So
that's true. And in fact, we are starting to see some pushback, because now I recently saw a letter that was signed by Marilyn Kirkpatrick from the Clark County Commission. She was pushing back against the governor's how his response has been to the COVID crisis, because even the health district is saying, we don't know what he's going to do. He doesn't consult us until it's done. And then we have to kind of revert to whatever we're doing to fit what he has just mandated. And I think the people are saying, yeah, it's kind of crazy. It used to be we had a plan. Well, where's the plan? Well, we're going to have phases. Well, what happened to the phases? Well, now we're following the lead of the CDC. Well, now the CDC says that the curve's been flattened, that we're doing better, and now Governor Sisolak threw that out and said, well, we're not following that. We're following the best science available. But the people that he has on his task force, none of them are scientists or medical professionals.
Interesting. I do want to know, when I had Michael Naft on, I caught them right after the emergency meeting, and he did talk about the phases and that none of the phases were time dependent. They were based off of statistics, based off of what's been provided through the health organizations. I feel like Sisolak's done a good job in the beginning. Obviously we had some sort of pandemic that we didn't know what was happening, so we had to shut things down because it was bad in the beginning in March and April. But I did tweet like a few months ago, and I was like, the governor's done everything right and still ended up in the shittiest situation of them all. Yeah. So that made me start reconsidering what needs to be done, if what's been going on and shutting things down and causing this economic catastrophe, which, it's hard for one man to even govern that kind of situation.
Oh, I agree. I think he did a good job. I think he made a right call in the beginning. And as long as we had a game plan, as long as we, again, had a goal, something to work to achieving, but he kept moving the goalpost. Yep. He kept saying, okay, well, we just need to get to this point. And then, and it doesn't help that, we can't go to an entertainment venue or a place where there's live music, and then the governor's in an Italian restaurant listening to live music without a mask. And, people are going, well, wait a minute, you're asking me to sacrifice, and here you are, and you're not. So I think the people have kind of
started to notice. There's a lot of pain. I've seen a lot of my fellow coworkers and, friends that work on the Strip start actually vocally speaking out now because they're all hurting. And, this isn't just a say to like open everything up immediately.
No, and I'm not saying that.
Yeah,
I don't condone that.
But I think something does need to happen in order to help Vegas get back on his feet, because I do think that not just Nevada, but a lot of the more liberal governments are kind of praying for that stimulus package to get passed, to get bailed out.
But that's short term.
We don't know if it's happening though.
But even that short term, that's not an answer. Another round of stimulus package. People don't want to be reliant on the government, and there is a party in the United States that would love for people to be reliant on the government. They would also love to give illegals free health care. And, there's a fringe that wants to give free school, free health care and everything. People want to go back to work. People don't want to be reliant on the government. And someday you got to pay the piper. Nothing in this life is free. And I think that, again, let's get people back to work, make it a personal choice. If somebody's scared to death and doesn't want to go back to work, that's great. Then don't go back to work. That's your personal choice. But I don't want this city to go the way of some of the other larger cities. I don't want it to go the way of Detroit, where we have beautiful buildings, but there's nobody in them, and I would hate to see that happen to Las Vegas.
Beautiful Vegas. It's not just the people who live here, city. It's everyone across the world. That's why I think everyone is so frustrated with what's happening. And starting this podcast, I realized that there is a much larger community that's not just actually physically located in Vegas. There's so many people that are passionate about Vegas and that hate the violence that's happening. And I've talked to other podcasters and friends that tourist and come out here all the time that they want to see things open up as well. But it's such a weird melting pot of confusion, frustration, and just like sickness and economic crisis. It's really hard to know, but eventually you can't just sit in one spot. You have to start making strides forward.
Right. And I think just as you said it, people don't know, am I making a decision based on science? Am I making a decision based on the best available knowledge? I mean, in the beginning, nobody knew what this virus did. And now, you hear about herd immunity. You look at countries like Sweden that really didn't change too much, and they're pretty much back to normal. We have coastal cities like New York that are completely still shut down, and the people are rising up. They're saying, wait a minute, we've done everything we're supposed to do, and now you're closing us down again. I mean, the restaurants, there's no indoor dining in New York. They have to sit outside and eat. And now you've got people butting heads with the protesters. And I don't even know what the people are protesting half the time. I mean, I understand the BLM and I understand things, but Antifa, I think, my own personal opinion, I think they're just anarchists. And if the Democrats think that Antifa supports them, I think they got a rude awakening. I don't think they support anything other than anarchy.
Yeah, I think Antifa is kind of just, it's really severed the left in a sense. That's kind of where I stood was, I've always grown up liberal, but I don't agree with what Antifa is doing, and they've kind of hijacked the BLM movement,
and that's unfortunate.
And it's unfortunate for what they're trying to stand for. I actually had Stretch Sanders on here, who organized the 6,000 person peaceful protest in Vegas, and that everything in Vegas has been, for the most part, completely peaceful. And it's great to see their message across. But once you start seeing extreme, like you're talking about, and in your message about political extremism, it just hijacks everything that was going for them.
That message was lost when Officer Shea was shot in the back of the head. People said, "Wait, that's ridiculous."
But he wasn't shot by a protester, though.
But it was during a protest. So how do you single out and say, I mean, that person was on the street because Antifa was on the street. And the message that BLM, and whether it was a right message or wrong message, that message was lost when the first brick was thrown, when the first building was set on fire. There was a gas station set on fire down by the outlet mall. And whatever message BLM was trying to put forth was lost because all people were seeing is the violence and the rage.
Yeah, we're in a weird time.
Yeah,
but I know Vegas will recover. We need to take some active leadership, all of us individually, to do it. We can't sit back anymore.
I agree.
We have to rise up and do something that's not just violent and out of frustration. We need to have a clear mind, and that's the best way to do it. And that's something sounds like you have clear mind, and you see the values and you see what you want to do. And you're not even just like a straight, it's almost a dirty word to say conservative at this point.
Well, it's funny that you say that, because I talk to people and they say, you're a Republican? I say, yeah, I'm a Republican, but I like to think of myself as a centrist. I don't vote straight party. I vote the candidate. I vote the issue. And they go, well, I read your bio and you're heavily involved in the union. How can you be a Republican and be in the union? I said, well, the power of the union is far more important than the power of one individual. So you have to work within the confines of the situation in the union. So yeah, I mean, I'm a Republican, but that's because I've always been a Republican.
And like I said, there's even parts that you agreed with Sisolak in the beginning. It's not all just like you can't. It's not always the opposite take of whatever your opponent or somebody on the opposite side is doing. And I think that's something that gets lost in translation, especially the closer that we get to elections, is like, it's not them, it's the complete opposite. So, I admire that, because
thank you.
In these times, it's tough. It's tough to do that, because the people who back you, sometimes they want to see the complete opposite take, even though that that's not the right decision. And that's something that we see echoed on the more grander political levels, is extreme left and extreme right. And I think in local politics, and it's something that I've been learning, is that there's actually a lot more similarities in local politics, because you're not governing millions of people, you're governing thousands. And so the similar lines are, for what's good for the city, fall in line like almost on top of each other. But then there's the small, very important directions that need to be made. And that's kind of where that bottleneck is.
Well, and along those lines too, I mean, nationally, I don't think a lot of people are affected by who's in the White House. I think more people are affected by what happens locally. What's my property tax rate going to be? What's my property values going to be worth? Am I going to have a job to go to? And that's done at a local level. And one of the things that we keep seeing is, well, how can we allow all this violence and everything to happen under President Trump's watch? It's in the Constitution. The president doesn't control what happens in the individual states. And I think people need to understand that. So that's where the local government comes into play. I think the local government has more of an impact on people's lives than the national politicians.
And that's greatly what I've learned over this last 6 months when Trump allowed the governors to dictate what their coronavirus response is. And I do agree that was the right response to do. Maybe there should have been a little bit more leadership through his charisma, but
yeah, I mean, between you and me, president says stuff, and as a Republican, president says stuff that makes me cringe sometimes. But again, I look at his deeds rather than his words. I look at what he's done and what he's accomplished and where we are now as opposed to where we were 4 years earlier.
Yeah, I do agree with that. Mike, I always ask 2 questions on the way out.
All right.
Same question to everyone. The first one is, the year is 2030. What does the life of Mike Thomas look like?
2030.
10-year outlook.
10-year outlook. Well, hopefully I'll be alive in 2030. I'd like to see my kids grow up and be married and live nice, long, happy lives. I'd like to see Las Vegas not take 10 years to come back and bounce back to be where it was, being the tourist destination and the entertainment capital of the world. I would hope that we could do that realistically in less than 2 years. But so 2030, hopefully I'll be able to sit by the pool and enjoy my life and have my wife by my side.
I love it. Last question is, what does Las Vegas mean to you?
I call Las Vegas home. Las Vegas is my home. As I said, I grew up in the San Fernando Valley in Los Angeles, but my grandfather had lived here since the late 50s. My uncle and aunt have both taught at high school here. And so I spent most of my weekends in Las Vegas coming out here. I told you that I swam competitively. I was actually offered a scholarship to UNLV for swimming, and the bottom fell out of that, kind of like the story of my life with the sheriff's department. But I was offered a scholarship, and I was on my way to the Olympic trials in 1980 when the president at the time, Jimmy Carter, said, we're not going to go to the 1980 Olympics because of Russia's invasion of Afghanistan. And so that put a kibosh on that. And I said, I don't know that I want to swim for 6 hours of my day. So I tried to concentrate on my art and didn't go to UNLV on a partial swimming scholarship. And, again, not to retread, but that's how I ended up on my career choice.
Hey. It always circles back to Vegas, just like we were talking about on the way walking up here.
It does. I love Vegas. Vegas is my home. I mean, I live here. This is where I choose to live, raise my family. And in fact, I remember telling my wife when we first moved out here, I saw kind of what was going on in Los Angeles, and I said, in California, and I said, if it takes Nevada 15 years to turn into California, that's 15 more years that I have. So I'm good with that.
Oh, always got to eggs on a gripe with the Californians.
Yeah.
So before we get out of here, let everyone know any information regarding the elections, where to go vote, timetables, mail-ins. It's all confusing and everything. So just let us know on how to do that and how to get involved with you.
Okay. You can go to my website. You can go to www.electmichaelthomas.com. I'm also on Facebook, just under my name. Committee, or on Facebook, it's Committee to Elect Michael Thomas, Clark County Commission, District A. And that's really about it. One thing I did think of while we were talking, and I wrote myself a little note. You did interview Michael Naft. You seem to be fair and balanced, and I like the questioning, and you don't seem to have one side or the other. I would love if you wanted to hold a debate between Mr. Naft and I would extend that invitation, and I would love to have you moderate it if that's something you'd be willing to do.
Absolutely, I would be honored to moderate that.
Okay,
we'll make sure to reach out to him once we have this episode released. I hope that Mike, if you are listening, or somebody who's in his staff, tell them to hit me up. We've had both of you on. I think it's fair and to understand that we're all humans at the end of the day. And just because we have differing beliefs doesn't mean that there should be just some sort of like hate and anger towards it. There's always common grounds. I think that's what's so powerful about longer conversations.
I agree. And you prefaced it the best. You said this way you get to see people and you get to hear them and you get to see how they interact. And it's not a Zoom call. It's not, distance conversation through television monitors. I think that a debate would be really great, and I would look forward to doing that. And I would love if he responded and told you that he would, enjoy that.
I would be honored, and I would love that. Mike, if you are listening, let's do it. Let's get it right on before the election.
Yeah, let's do it.
Any information about the elections? Where do you know anywhere where they can vote? What's the day? Is it mail-in balloting? What is going on with it?
Well, again, the general election is November 3rd. Early voting starts, I believe, the 17th of October.
Something around there.
Yeah, around then. And, they can just go on the Clark County website and the Clark County elections, and they can find out where their polling places are, because there are people that do want to vote in person, and the mail-in ballot. And the mail-in ballot's a whole other issue.
That's what I'm saying.
I don't even want to get into it. Who knows what's going to happen? I just hope it doesn't end up in like a hanging Chad situation like we saw years ago in Florida, because that would just further divide this country.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly. Well, Mike, thank you for coming on. This is seriously a privilege and an honor. And now that I know you, I know that you are a human who has beliefs, and it's not just full of hate.
Thank you, Jake. I really appreciate it, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to meet with you and to talk.
I appreciate it, and I thank all of you for watching on YouTube or listening. We will catch you next time.